Hey, I'm here with Glenn Galaxy.
Yes,
Is that correct?
correct.
It's on your birth certificate.
Yeah,
Uh,
Glenn Galaxy, Glenn Galloway.
Galaxalag.
Yeah.
Are there any more that I should know about?
I think that covers it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Glenn has a lot of different music projects
Mm-hmm.
that are all very unique in their own ways, and I'm here today at his Singing Serpent studio in San Diego to discuss his band Soul Junk, which what was the is Soul Junk essentially you're the constant
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Soul Junk, and it's been I'd like to say at least 4 or 5 different bands over the years.
Yeah. I have been a constant. My brother John has been the bass player for most of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the current lineup has been the same. Um, it's my son Judah on drums, my brother John on bass, and my brother Brian on guitar and keys. And
So it's
then
a family unit.
it is definitely a family unit. Yep. And that
Wow.
was ever since. That's been about 12 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. So are you still currently, like, is Soul Junk active at the moment, would you say, or?
We so the last thing we did was we played 13 months ago. We did a show, and anytime, and then before that we played in Norway at a festival. And so it's kind of been, people will say, "Hey, does Soul Junk want to play?" And then, you know, we'll we'll just practice like crazy for 2 months. I don't I don't like the reunion show thing, so I want it to feel like an active band.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's great.
Hmm.
So how did it come about?
Soul Junk came about in 1993, and I was in the back of a pickup truck, and I was with Truman's Water, and we were on a U.S. tour.
Truman's Water, just some background for
Truman's Water was this very noisy noise rock band in the early 90s, and it was wonderful. We just started very close to here in San Diego, and these guys put an ad in the paper, and it was like uh, vocalist wanted, brains optional. And I answered that because I couldn't afford an instrument at the time.
Oh, wow.
Um, and eventually, one of them like bought me a $70 PV guitar at a pawn shop, and I was ready to go. And
Nice.
so, um, Truman's Water kind of all of a sudden got to go to Europe and tour around and put records out because John Peel found one of our handmade records and like was playing whole sides of it on his show.
Oh,
And we
wow.
did several Peel sessions, and so it was kind of like 0 to 90 with that band. We just went from playing for 15 people at the Casbah here in town to playing in London, opening for Babes in Toyland, opening for Fugazi. It was
Yeah.
a wild couple of years. And so in the middle of that, we were on these long drives, and long story short, I just really heard God speak to me clearly of come out and do this new thing that I'll show you to do. And it was the most bizarre experience because it was just we'd have these long drives, and I just remember I read the Gospel of Luke front to back on a drive from Louisville to DC, and then the next day we drove from DC to Chapel Hill, and I read all of the Book of Acts, and it was following that where I was just like, this is where I'm living, and that was in the days following was when I heard God just speak like, I got something new for you. And
It sure was too. Now,
yes.
I I feel like people who aren't familiar with your music, which is a lot,
Yeah.
are gonna hear this story and think, okay, so he's like following orders from God to leave this experimental rock band and
Yes.
go play God's music. And I'm going to just drop in right here. I think it's the first track on your first Soul Junk
it.
album, The
Yeah.
Lord's Saxophone.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a little bit of that. Classic gospel.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so that album and subsequent ones for a while, it was pretty much just straight up biblical lyric content, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the occasional like, yeah, all right, thrown in.
Exactly.
I mean, you had some original lyrics on those as well.
Yeah.
The bulk. That was that just what?
Yeah, I guess what it was is I was in a very strange headspace of I was one of these like most of what I was listening to that at that time was like Japanese noise, free jazz. Like it was kind of like as far as you can stretch me, that's where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I love the boredoms. I loved, I remember I was listening to like late period Coltrane all the time, Eiler, I remember a voice crack record, Borba Magus that I loved. Like I was into just going as far sonically as I could.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I had come off several years of running as hard as I could from God, and having Him find me at the end of that. And so when I reconnected, it was deep. Like it was kind of like I remember just going like, I can't go back to what I had before, but feeling God just say like, don't worry, I have something more for you. So I was on this very unique trajectory of being like all in spiritually, spending just tons of time with God, tons of time just like really saying, show me what it means to be alive spiritually, show me who you are, show me, and at the same time like chasing after the most bizarre noise that I could find,
Yeah.
So then to me the first Soul Junk record was like, well, this is what gospel music should be, right? It was the early 90s, and by that time, like some of the like I would listen to 60s and early 70s gospel, and I would just be like, this is incredible. Where did we wander from this? This is raw. This is pure. This is just coming, like, this is inspired, and I would listen to late 80s, early 90s, just like, jazz chops to the nines, overproduced in my mind, to somebody who's listening to the late period Coltrane.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to feel this. I want to like, so yeah, the early Soul Junk was just very much just like, let it rip, let it roar. Way too Christian for the weirdos, way too weirdo for the Christians.
Yeah. It's perfect. The perfect storm. Yeah, absolutely. Which album was that Kingdom Fruits song? The one I'm talking about? Yeah. I feel like that's a real good example of just like taking the scripture from the Bible, but like making it into like your own thing and like totally owning it and screaming your head off.
Yeah.
You kill the prophets.
Yeah, so and this is by way of answering your last question too. It's
Mhm.
in other words, okay, so I felt this call of God to start this new band, and he's like, it's going to be about me. It's going to be about me. And at that point, all I knew was hymns.
Mhm.
What did I know of sacred music? I knew of hymns. I knew of the gospel stuff. I was just talking about. People would make me tapes of James Cleveland, and I just be like, yes. And then I
Yeah.
knew, like, at that time it was like my girlfriend was taking me, my fiance was taking me to the vineyard, so it was very early vineyard worship.
Mhm.
And I would find things in all of those worlds that I could connect with, but I couldn't write in on any of those worlds. I was just
Sure.
like, my brain was just musically, I was just not anywhere close to any of those musical worlds. And so I'm like, okay, God, I'm gonna write. This band is gonna be about you. So I don't know. So I would just, like, sometimes there would be some songs where I'd just be praying, I'd be just hanging out with God, and I'd just start writing. And there would be some songs where I would just sing verbatim my stream of consciousness, what I wrote.
Uh-huh.
And then the only other thing I knew to do was to, when God would speak to me in His Word, I would say that, just that little bit right there resonates so deeply with me. So I would write a song around that. I would connect it with something. Kingdom's Fruit's a good idea, or a good example. Very, like, I was into, like, all the a good friend of mine, who now runs Ghana Records, one of the guys who runs Ghana Records, he had a fanzine called Wipeout, and it was all the, like, like, super garagey, like, just, it was a great counter to, like, Coltrane, right? Which is just,
Sure.
or noise or whatever, because garage was just so, just like, we got 2 chords, we got 3 chords, we're just milking it for all we're worth. So I love that kind of grounding element. That was my pop, And so Kingdom's Fruit is just like, as I saw it, it was just a noisy good garage rocker. And when I wrote that riff, I just heard, like, there was just this snarl to it. There was just this like, and when I read that specific passage, it was right at the end of Jesus' life, where he was getting the full brunt of the establishment pushing him out,
Mhm.
saying, like, we've decided you're not the one, and him, like, in that space saying, like, you're rejecting yourselves, you're
Yeah.
disqualifying yourselves, and just the passion in his voice of how badly he wanted them to get it, and how thoroughly they weren't, and they were just slamming the door on him and on their own future, as whatever. Could go way off on that, but there was just this energy in what he said there of, the kingdom has been taken from you, and it will be given to a non-people. It'll be given to someone you consider nobody.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that energy in that little phrase he said, they're connected with this super raw riff that I'd written, and you're right. It's just like, it was perfect. I just got to, like, go in my, it was either my brother's barn outside of his, he had this, like, garage barn thing in Inland Del Mar, which is hilarious, like, the concept of Inland Del Mar, if you know San Diego. um,
Well, tell me about that. It's like,
well, so Del Mar is just a very wealthy area, but
okay.
if you get, at this point in the 90s, if you got east of the 5 freeway,
Mhm.
there were these sections where it was just, like, just shacks. It was beautiful. It was like you could be in rural Arkansas for all you knew,
Uh-huh.
but you were right across the freeway from $5 million houses,
Okay.
So it was
Yeah.
very funny. But yeah, there was my brother was single at the time, and he had a garage barn, and it was just like, none of his roommates cared if I just went out there and screamed my head off,
Cool.
into a 4-track,
Yeah,
which is
good
what I did.
spot.
Yeah.
Oh. And okay, so chronologically, your albums go forward. Your EPs go backward.
Yeah.
Your first album's 1950. The last one was, 61? Is that right?
Yeah, I think we recorded all the way till 63, but 62 and 63 didn't really get finished or released yet, so.
How was that just like you called the first one 1950 and then just stuck with it, or?
Yeah, okay, and the reason for that was this is around 90. This was in 93, and like I said, I was having this epiphany of like I said, I was really trying to get to essential. I was connecting the dots between just these weird dissonant noise things, and then like what I was like hearing as like pop music, and like I said, to me a lot of it was just like simplicity. I was like hearing in the 50s and the 60s. I was seeing these periods of time where musicians would find out these little tricks where, like in the 50s, rock and roll was big band condensed. All of a sudden with amplifiers and volume, now you didn't need
the whole orchestra.
You didn't need exactly 35 people to make a bang,
Yeah.
3 or 4 people could just set a room on fire. And so it was like all this energy that came from people who had just ridiculous chops as players, and now you don't have to spend all this time coordinating 35 people and transporting all this gear. You can just set up some, you know what I mean? And so it's all this extra just like energy, and you have 3 or 4 people. So I was very intrigued with the concept of early rock and roll, and then I would see that with hip hop too,
Low, 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 low. I'ma blow up your oscilloscope, ask the Pope. Cause true religion speaks to those with no hope. Bootstrap believers give you just enough rope to let you drop when you hit the point that you can't cope. Y'all can't hang, that's why we do that thing. Spiritual songs, they all get same fat editor. Better to forget the predator. Whatever y'all rappers indebted to. Call up your senator, vote for new style. We do rile. Any crowd would have a clue now. Representatives up in the house and you'll die. Congressional taking the floor with Deuce Wide. Kings, queens, and aces gonna taste the juice, child. New buy, filibuster beyond the blue now. The loop pile, wigging parliamentary trump card. We bump hard, replacing poor faces with true smiles. I'ma blow up your oscilloscope, ask the Pope.
Yeah, Soul Junk sort of became more of a hip hop entity about the time I think I first saw y'all in maybe like 1998.
So what did you first hear of us?
It was our mutual friend Orlando Greenhill.
Yeah.
I believe turned me on to 1955.
Okay.
Because he was in Javelina Rail Company,
Yeah.
which was on Jackson Rubio Records, which I don't even remember how the hell I met Orlando. It was just like it had to happen.
Yeah.
In both of our lives, we were just destined to meet.
He's incredible.
And I went to one of his shows somewhere, and we were looking at like the Jackson Rubio merch table. He's like, hey Matt, to Matt Wignall, the guy who ran the label. He's like, can I give this to Mark? And it's like, sure. And so he gave me 1955, and it was over. I was a devotee for life after that. I had never heard such weird ass inside out space alien hip hop.
It's
and
ridiculous.
Like psychedelic trance music and just experiments in stereo.
Yeah.
And studies on I don't know, that album just like there was nothing like it.
Filtered on location. We're firm with the slurred speech, teaching blurry vision. Bring you much malmerciful jugular vision. Our mission is to phase out the brazen imitation. The suckers curry favor, but still they got no flavor. Flushed out the touch, some color by numbers. We save you the trouble of slaving as a double of a jump. You played out your microphone Trump last summer. We slammed down the hammer on the slumlord. Carved out my own corner of the universe. in the sector by the power of the resurrector. Christ has authority in me, so reap the benefits and don't quit. 16 pounds dropped on your block, flipping your left back and shredding your socks. Let me rewind your clocks to the year 3380, the year that infinity hit your vicinity. Juice came unglued and the reaper got rocked.
It's kind of funny, right? Because if that's your starting point, then you're game for anything.
Yeah,
Because it's 2.5 hours. It's like unedited, unabridged. You know, it's you're finding a band that is writing in like this beautiful confusion of like. I was at this point where I had pushed the limits of a rock and roll band, and you know the mid '90s, and just hearing these sounds coming from you know whatever
rattling around up there. Yeah,
somebody's subs, and this was not me at this point. Like I was driving around listening to all my music on these like you know boom boxes that I'd found at thrift stores, you know, and so all you know,
yeah,
it was just treble and gain and like that. I just you know heard roar. That's all I was, and so all of a sudden I was hearing these forms of music I had no connection to, I had no knowledge of, and I remember finding my way to some of the weirder drum and bass stuff and like early like Plug and Square Pusher and like early Aphex Twin, and this was just like, okay, this is harnessed noise of a different stripe. And so then I just dove in and I was writing for all these magazines and would just get all, I didn't make any money at that time. I would get all my new music through writing through magazines and trading, you know, whatever I wasn't listening to all the time to get just this rabid appetite for new music at that time.
Did you know you could rap? I mean,
no.
That's the craziest thing is that you've got a very natural, like, you have a very natural approach to it.
Yeah.
The lyrics are just off the wall, especially coming from the band's previous lyrical content.
Sure.
It got very surreal, I want to say.
Yeah.
And you know, like a lot of symbolism and everything like that, but just the wordplay. It's like, you could be like a crossword editor or something. Just like the crazy twists and turns with the English language that just really interesting choices.
I think I've always been fascinated with things that seem to defy gravity. You know, I mean, when I was a kid, like, you know, I love like Lewis, you like Walrus and the Carpenter, you know, like I just love stream of consciousness. I mean, I remember being a high schooler and being into T.S. Eliot, you know, and abstract, like super abstract art, and I just, that sort of like Dadaist, that absurdist hip hop thing. There were just like in the 90s, there were just little glimmers of it because it was so. I remember being like in school, late 80s, and I remember I had a cassette tape with Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks on one side, and Public Enemy's Nation of Millions on the other side, and it made perfect sense to me. Like it was just like these are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
you know, but. To me, in my early exposure to hip hop, it was not party music. It was very aggressive.
Yeah,
it was very just tons of aggression, tons of just, and so the sort of absurdist angle to it. I think like hearing some of Wu-Tang stuff and just RZA's willing, you know, like let's cut the beat at the wrong point.
Yeah,
you know,
it's kind of like Chuck D reading Finnegan's Wake or something.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that. It really
Chuck D Finnegan's Wake.
It's a lot of fun to listen to, and anytime I share that stuff with people, they're just like, "What? How did I not know about this?" And then, so Michael Kaufman,
yes,
somehow wound up getting involved and taking that help, like you guys kind of became a dynamic duo for a little
Yeah,
bit.
so between 1955 and which was when you started listening, between that and 1956 and 1957 was this transition where I kind of lost my band because everybody was just at a point where, you know, like just getting married, just having kids, just, you know, getting jobs. It was like that kind of like, and so we slowly went from, you know, all being single and just like playing all the time together and just improvising and just to like, hey, I, you know, people being like, I can play twice a month, like, you know, and it was just like, and then at the same time, we got picked up by 5 Minute Walk for a 1956 record, and they were just like, basically, as much as you can tour, we'll book you. Like, if you want to be on the road 5 months a year, we'll book you. And I was starting this business at the time. Jude was a little guy. He was like 4 or 5 years old. I wasn't going to live on the road, you know. But I was willing to do, you know, they would fly me out for like 4, 5, 6 shows at a time, you know, weird places in the country. And so I was thinking like, this will work, you know, I'll do these little bits and pieces thing. But the rest of my band was like, no, we can't do that. You know, we can't just take weeks off every month. And so I had this weird thing, you know, where I was like doing more and more abstract hip hop and like the weirdo electro stuff. And so I was kind of thinking, well, maybe I don't, you know, if I don't have a band, maybe I don't necessarily need a band. And then Michael Kaufman had been in town, and I called him up. He was in New York City at the time, in Brooklyn, and I just said, hey, what would you think of you know, kind of being my rhythm section?
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is Michael was just like, well, I don't even know what I would do, but of course I know what I would do. You know, he just like he can come up with anything out of thin air. And so we kind of became this dynamic duo where he, you know, I had a guitar with like way too many malfunctioning pedals, and then he would play like a Chaos Pad and like a Casio, or, you know. And then we hooked up with I was buying so much like underground hip hop at the time. There was a guy in downtown San Diego had a store called Tools of the Trade, and I would, you know, go down there and just be like, show me something that will blow my mind. And, you know, he'd just have some bootleg Premiere thing, or just, he really enjoyed the fact that, you know, the early like weirdo Madlib and MF Doom and all that stuff, 90s, was insane. And he loved the fact that I gravitated toward the weirdo stuff. So pretty soon he would kind of be our, like, how do you say, like, kind of the more straight DJ. In Soul Junk terms, straight DJ, it doesn't really mean it, because he was
still pretty out there.
Exactly. He would like play like bizarre breaks, and then he would fragment them and dissect them and throw them out of beat and everything. And then you had Michael over on the other side, who was a complete randomizer. You know, he's just playing like robot sounds through you know, Chaos Pad.
Yeah, there was a lot of very glitchy things happening.
Guidance to direct ad hoc implanted and like at the sink flow draining brain.
So that was fun. That was a really fun era because it was the three of us, and we toured over Europe and played you know, trips to the East Coast and stuff together.
Was that Soul Junk's first time in Europe? Or? Did the full band go over there before?
I'm trying to think. John and I went over. I think John and I went over. Did we? Because Truman's Water would have us open for them every now and then, like, in Italy and Spain, and sometimes we would Soul Junk would share Truman's drummer, Kevin Cassell. And
Okay.
I think my brother John went with me at least 1 or 2 times. But then, yeah, once we were like the more like portable rhythm section,
Uh-huh.
then it was easy. Then it was just like, sure.
Yeah, just show up with a couple backpacks. or
Exactly. And a
suitcase.
guitar
Yeah.
and some effects pedals. And yeah.
You'd never used a guitar strap, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just love that. You just cradle it in your elbow. The neck's right up, neck of the guitar's up against the neck of your body.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
And I really like when you I'm just kind of nerding out right
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
but I
no
really enjoy when you like kind of wave it around like it's an actual axe.
So okay, so the quick story on that was one of the last shows I played regularly as a regular part of Truman's Water in '93. We were at the Casbah, place was packed out. On the second song, I broke my strap.
Yeah.
My strap was just 2 like thrift store belts duct taped together, so of course it broke.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a bunch of friends in the audience, and I was like, "Hey, could I borrow a strap from anybody?" Nobody had a strap. So I was like, well, this sucks because a PVT 60 is not a light guitar. And
Mhm.
so I was just like, well, I guess I'll make it through this set. It was like one of those things where you just feel like, well, the set is ruined. We'll just make it through as best as we can.
Yeah.
And then somewhere around the like 4th or 5th song, I was like, this is actually doable. Like I'm going to actually be able to make this and have fun with it. And by the end of the set, I was really enjoying it, And the weird glitch in it is I've played my own tuning ever since 1990, 1991. I made up my own tuning, and it's very, very caveman. It's all E's and B's.
Yeah.
So
Big power chord.
right. So I think that allows for me to be able to like every chord formation. I'm not doing these weird things. I can cradle it between these, and so I found like this works. So then after that show, I just thought, hey, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And I got a lighter guitar from a pawn shop,
Mm-hmm.
some $10 guitar that was super light.
Yeah, you got what, like a K or a Dan Electro or?
Well, now I have a Dan Electro, but at that time it was like a no-name, $10 guitar.
Nice.
And, but yeah, no, it became something where I'm like, I love this. So I played a Les Paul for a while, and then I had to wear a strap, but then I just kind of figured out like I do better with single pickups and lighter, like I'm going for a less meatier sound,
Uh-huh.
a less meaty sound. So yeah, so the thinner guitars, the Dan Electros work great. And I think in Soul Junk later in Soul Junk and in Octagrape especially, exactly what you're saying about like in between the notes, the guitar can be in the air.
Yeah.
There is no strap. So there were a lot of sets where like I would go out and I'd be like, okay, how much of the set can the guitar be in the air? Because it can,
You ever had any unfortunate accidents wielding your axe like that?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody take it to the skull or?
No.
Okay.
Well, I did hit Jude. It was not nice. It was
That's
like
your son?
my son. He was, and it was it was at Biola. It was during the Jackson Rubio days. So
Uh-huh.
you might have even been there. We were playing with Javelina.
Yeah, it could have been. I went to a bunch of those.
Jude came up on stage. He was like 5 years old, and he just came up and he had this plastic guitar and he was jumping around. And I think he actually I was jumping around. I don't know if the guitar hit him or I hit him, but
Oh man.
it wasn't like,
You guys are okay now
we're
though, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
We're okay.
So you mentioned Octagrape.
Yep.
I don't want to skip over because we talked about like sort of the deep glitchy hip hop era.
Yeah.
And you sort of transitioned back into like more of a heavy, sludgy, ultra biblical theme.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good. So chronologically, just in a more linear, like, so yeah, you open up with the super like
skronky,
like free jazz, and then just super thin 2 guitar and destroyed drums, stuff that characterizes the early albums. Then the like an actual rock band forms around that. So you have a little more full spectrum, rock era.
Say 1953.
53 would be, and part of 55, yeah.
Yeah, 55 had a lot of rock on it.
Yeah, and they recorded it at a bigger studio.
Sound fully realized, yeah.
Yeah, and then transitioning into more of the glitch hop stuff. 1956 had more like garage rock and glitchy hip hop.
It's like a little bit of like Baroque hip hop, even.
Yeah, you're totally right. We had like the string section and
checking if your church got built by man. Let's liquidate the physical and see what still stands. Cause if your church not made with hands, indivisible, one mind, invisible, that's right. Checking if your church got built by man. Let's liquidate the physical and see what still stands. Cause if your church not made with hands, indivisible, one mind, invisible, that's right.
I see what you call the church getting chubby in the waist. So if I ain't to your taste, have some peace, take some grace. But let's get the inner tube out religion's middle, where tradition reigns supreme and the spirit second fiddle. These live their life on their some milk and chewing the cud. That's why it's time for eat my flesh and drink my blood.
I love doing that. I think Bowie was huge. I love the Bowie weird string arrangements. So that was that era, and then you're right. Then it went like full. 57 and 58 were just straight up glitch hop. There was no rock band.
Very harsh.
Yes.
Sonically.
Yes.
Yeah. I was very touched by those.
Yeah. No, that was fun.
And then it was I guess, was it 59?
Yeah. So then at that point, Michael moved away, and I was playing a ton in my little church, and I just kind of looked up and was just like, whoa, Soul Junk's not really playing or doing records, and this is such an important part of me. And so that's when I wrote 59, and it was a return to kind of like there's a little bit of the lo-fi hip hop in there, but it's not so like grating and aggressive as 57, 58 at all.
Yeah, it's a little more a little poppier musically.
Yeah,
and you are just cramming those Psalms in there, right? It's the Book of Psalms.
Yes, I got this whole thing, and I remember telling Michael when Michael was still in Soul Junk, like, I'm just gonna, like, instead of writing my own raps, I'm just gonna rap the whole Bible. That was my thing. I was like, I'm going to rap the whole Bible. Every album will be an entire book of the Bible. And I remember Michael just being like, really? That's gonna be tricky.
That's a challenge.
That's a challenge,
And you made some headway there. I didn't even realize that I was going through your discography on Bandcamp, which is great. Now you got all that stuff up there, that like a lot of small press stuff, and you did like Genesis and Exodus on there.
Half of, or 2/3 of Exodus.
2/3 of Exodus.
And then I just realized, like, this is really dense.
It is very dense.
It's very dense. There's a lot of words.
There's you do get some hooks in there somehow, though. We'll hear it. This is a little bit of Exodus here.
Then Moses answered and said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you. So the Lord said to him, what is in your hand? He said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. So he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. And he reached out his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Furthermore, the Lord said to him, now put your hand into your bosom. They put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. And he said, put your hand in your bosom again. So he put his hand in his bosom again, drew it out of his bosom. Behold, it was restored like his other flesh. And then it will be, if they do not believe you, nor
Are you imagining it?
I'm imagining.
Yeah. forget which one I was gonna play, but I don't think I decided. Anyways, yeah. So, are you still planning on? Is this still a life goal of yours?
So no, at that point, I just realized like, okay, the Psalms are actually, this is.
They're intended as
They are
songs.
intended to be songs, and so I started singing entire psalms, and that was 1959 was the first 23 psalms, all verbatim.
Talking a lot about statutes.
Yes.
And-
Well, no, that's
sick. 1960.
That's 1960.
Okay.
And so there's a big transition between those two because 1959 is still the glitch hoppy kind of stuff with actual songs written over the guitar songs or piano songs written over them, where I'm singing the first 23 psalms. 1960 is, you're right, that's when it gets into, like, all of a sudden I just realized I miss the just ridiculous, like, just massive rock cacophony that I had going with Truman's Water. I really started missing that, large rock feel.
Yeah.
Dissonant large rock. And I got this weird, we were down in Mexico doing something, and somebody was blaring an ELO song, and I was just like, what an amazing concept if we could, like, blend these ridiculous string arrangements of this early ELO stuff and, like, a dissonant, like, Truman's Water, USA is a Monster, like, just massive dissonant guitar rock. And so that was the inspiration for 1960, and it's all of Psalm 119, and you were correct, there's tons of precepts and statutes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's fun. I think once you have, like, a motif in, like, especially in something sort of like a concept album,
Yeah.
just every time that motif comes back up, you're like, okay, I'm back home.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
there's a lot of words going on here, but I got my statutes.
You have your statutes, right? You have your
Yep.
testimonies. Daniel Smith was really good at
Of Danielson family.
exactly.
Yeah.
He recorded that record. We recorded that record together in South Jersey. He actually recorded it, and I just played it with the band. And we had a makeshift band for that album, which was wonderful. It was Brian Cantrell, who I'd played with previously on 1952 and 1953, like the earlier soul junk rock stuff, and we had played in hardcore bands together in high school, and so he was great. He flew out to Jersey, and he was like the proper drummer on that record, and he could deliver the thunder. And then for the rest of the band, we had Emil Nikolevson from Oslo, from the band Silver. Oh, come on. He was in Royal. Emil's amazing. He did a record with Todd Rundgren recently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he played bass, and then Todd Fatal from Portland played keys. And so it was just like nobody really knew the songs before we showed up, but like those players just got it and delivered it, and that record was so much fun to do. But yeah, it was an anomaly because that band never played together live.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the next album,
61.
61.
That's when the family band really kicked in, because right when I came back from recording 1960, Jude was 11 and he was 10, 11. He was starting to play drums, and he was getting really sick of the rudiments, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the precepts. He just wanted to like rock. So he was listening to my rough mixes of 1960, and he loved them. And he would just, there was one day I came home and I heard him downstairs practicing, and I thought, I recognize that beat. And I went down there, I'm like, what are you playing? And he had the headphones on. He was playing with my rough mixes from that
Oh.
record. And I had my amp down there. I was like, do you want me to just like play the song, you know, take the headphones off? He's like, that would be great. And that's how we started playing together.
Oh, cool.
And so we made this crazy transition from, you know, Brian Cantrell, this amazing drummer who had played for decades, you know, and was like bringing the thunder rock, and all of a sudden now my 11-year-old son is playing those songs, you know.
Yeah, your
and-
Spawn.
Yes, just
Yeah.
rocking his face off. And that was like 1961 was written out of that, you know, kind of that energy of like, oh, we can play every night if we want, 15, 20 minutes downstairs. And my daughter started playing keys with us, and and then once a week, my two brothers would come over and join us, John and Brian.
Yeah.
And that became the family band. And yes.
Wow. Yeah, that's the dream, I guess. My daughters are 2 and 4, and we don't have a drum kit, but anytime they see one, they attack.
Yeah.
They love it.
Yeah.
They'll take up half the drum kit each and both blast out their own beats and sing their own songs
Yeah.
separate from each other at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's great. I'm guessing Judah was like that. In some way.
He really was, and I feel like I've always had this sense that, you know, I remember thinking kids could learn free jazz, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, kids don't necessarily want to listen to free jazz.
Yeah, not necessarily.
But at the same time, it's just like, you know, there is something just incredibly naively beautiful about that, of like,
Yeah.
we don't pretend to know anything. Let's just go with what is coming out right now on whatever instrument is in front of us right now. And that's how a kid plays music.
Yep.
You put things to bash in front of them, they will bash them, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the way I learned to play drums for the first Soul Junk album. Is I realized when I left Truman's Water that I was stepping out into midair, and none of my weirdo rock friends were going to be able to follow me into making this God music,
Mm-hmm.
and none of my God friends were going to understand the context musically. So the first 2 albums were just all me.
Yeah.
And I didn't play drums really at that time. And so what I did was I had a friend with the studio who gave me a key to his back room where the drums were set up. I bought a $400 drum set on Craigslist or whatever existed, the way
The recycler.
Yeah, exactly. And then just would come in and bash for 3 hours a day. And so I did that for 3 weeks straight, and then we recorded 1950. So it was just me being like a 4-year-old with a drum set. And you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
when I would bash for 3 hours, I wouldn't do rudiments. I wouldn't play beats. I would do whatever I wanted. I
Yeah.
would just hit stuff and then let it turn into something. And it was really fun talking to drummer friends afterwards who would you know, of course my meter was terrible. All the like things that drummers know to do, I didn't know to do, and I
Right.
did them terribly. But at the same time, the intuitive parts, my drummer friends would just be like, how did you think to do that? That's, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, because I didn't think, it just came out, and I made it work, you know. So
that's childlike nature.
that's the fun of playing with kids and playing with your kids.
Or playing, even as a grown up, playing something you've never played before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
As long as, talking about my kids again, I bought a saxophone last year, and for last summer, anytime I tried to pull it out, Camille would run up with like a ball or a toy or whatever she could find and just stuff it in the bell and say, "Papa, please put the saxophone away."
That's awesome.
So I couldn't even practice because I'm like, it sounds bad, but it's because you won't let me play a little bit.
Isn't that funny? She just like wouldn't give you the space to get past the ABCs.
Yeah. Yep.
Uh,
Well, I think we're gonna be wrapping it up here. You wanna give a little blessing for your new fans out there, or
yeah, I mean, thank you for listening, and there is quite a tome of musical material. If you have listened to just a bit of us or none of us, there's just hours and hours of all of what we've just talked about.
yeah,
And
I honestly haven't even heard it all. I learned of stuff I didn't know existed in the last few days, thinking I was I thought I had the whole canon down, but
yeah, I mean, listening back to it, it's hilarious, and I'm proud of just the fact that like I don't do anything halfway, and I'm proud that I did things that I'm very embarrassed of. I just think I love the fact that I wasn't afraid to be embarrassed of something later, and there's something in it that I'm like, I think the only reason I'm embarrassed of it is because it's me. Whereas if I heard someone else do that, I would just be like, yes. What reality do you exist in that made that okay? And I love that,
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the catalog is just being in midair and not having any self-consciousness about it, and so it's anyone who's diving in, it's like, yes, bless you. Enjoy yourself.
Gesundheit for listening. Awesome. Well, everybody, thanks for checking this out. This has been Glenn Galloway of Soul Junk. I'm Mark Lee Morrison, and you've been listening to Low Profile. Thanks a lot, Glenn. Love you.
Love you.
Peace, peace, peace. My peace I leave with you. Not as the world gives it all. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives it all. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives it all. Peace, peace, peace. It's my peace I leave with you. Not as the world gives at all. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives it all. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives. Not as the world gives it all. Peace, peace, peace. My peace I leave with you.